My name is Lydia Marin, 35 years old, Senior Environmental Data Analyst at the Evergreen Conservation Initiative. I've been called precise. Maybe too precise, someone who color codes data sets and memorizes rainfall patterns the way other people remember birthdays. For 6 years, I believed that accuracy could protect me. I was wrong. That Tuesday morning in Portland smelled of rain and printer ink, the kind of gray drizzle that makes everything feel suspended. I walked into Reginald Crane's office with my resignation letter in hand, printed on crisp paper and folded neatly in thirds. He didn't even glance up when I stepped inside. "Morning. Lydia," he said, eyes on his monitor. "I'd like to submit this formally," I told him, placing the envelope directly in his hand, not on his desk, not in his inbox, his hand. He raised an eyebrow. The polished kind of expression people in power perfect over time. "Is this really necessary? It's effective immediately." "With 2 weeks' notice," I said, steady but polite. He smiled the way someone does when they think they've already won. Then he slid the letter under a stack of grant proposals, exactly as though it were an irrelevant memo, and picked up a ringing phone. "Appreciate the update, Eleanor," he said into the receiver, waving a hand in my direction like I was dismissed. I stood there for another breath, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. Then I left, closing the door on the low murmur of his voice. 2 days later, HR told me they hadn't received my letter. By the end of the week, my name was still on the project rosters, still copied on donor emails. No one scheduled an exit interview. My 2-week notice came and went like a secret. That was when the truth settled in. Colder than the Portland rain outside my window, they didn't plan to let me go. At Evergreen, even leaving required permission and I no longer had it. So I stopped trying to be heard. I started watching instead. The next morning, I went back to HR. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and damp carpet, the usual scent of places where polite conversations go to die. Diane, the HR manager, looked up from her monitor as I entered. Her smile faltered when she saw me holding a folder. "I just wanted to confirm," I said softly. "My resignation was submitted 2 weeks ago. Has there been any update?" Her eyes darted to the glass wall facing the corridor. For a long second, she said nothing. Then, leaning closer, she whispered, "Reginald told us not to process it." The words hung in the air like static. "He said you were just upset about the promotion decision," she added quickly. "That you'd cool off." I stared at her. Diane's hands trembled slightly as she rearranged the papers on her desk. "I'm sorry. Lydia, you know how much influence he has with the board." Influence. The word was so gentle for something that felt like possession. When I got home, the silence felt heavier than usual. 6 years of my work filled every inch of the apartment binders labeled by watershed, year, and donor. Draft reports with his signature where mine should have been. On the top shelf sat the binder for the Riverside Restoration Project, still bearing his initials. The last time I saw it was on stage at a national conference, projected on a screen behind him as he accepted an award for his innovative community model. I remembered watching from the audience, the polite applause, the light glinting off his silver cufflinks. My stomach had clenched, not from anger, but from something emptier, the sound of being erased. Now, staring at the same binder, I felt that silence again, only this time. It didn't hurt. It sharpened. If they wanted quiet, I would give them quiet, but it would be the kind that listens, records, and waits. I closed the binder carefully, the click of the rings echoing in my apartment like the start of something deliberate. I stopped speaking unless it was required. The office moved around me as if I were part of the furniture, quiet, functional, invisible. That suited me. Every morning. I arrived before sunrise, unlocking my workstation while the city was still half asleep. I started archiving everything raw data sets, donor correspondence, internal memos. Each file received a timestamp, a checksum, and a mirrored backup on a private cloud account under my initials. I didn't alter a single line. I didn't need to. The truth was already written in the margins, they'd just stopped reading it. By week 2, the Prescott Wetlands Project folder began to unravel. The report claimed 80% of milestones completed, but the satellite data showed barely half the vegetation restored. Field photos attached to the quarterly report were dated months before planting even began. Someone had simply reused old images. Then came Riverside Watershed, the program that once made me proud. The official summary praised dramatic water quality improvements, but our sampling logs told a different story. Nitrogen levels climbing, dissolved oxygen dropping, fish counts shrinking by the season. Yet the charts Reginald presented to the donors glowed in bright green bars, labeled success. I kept typing meeting minutes as if nothing was wrong. When Reginald repeated my ideas word for word, a phased compliance model leveraging citizen engagement, I wrote it down exactly as he said it. The same sentence that appeared in my original proposal 3 months earlier. The new intern, Mara, sometimes lingered after meetings, giving me a puzzled look. "You don't say much," she said once. "I'm just listening," I replied, smiling faintly. By week 4, my folders filled faster than the server could sync. Fraud was no longer hidden. It was organized. I printed a few key pages and slipped them into a plain manila envelope marked personal. No accusations, no dramatic memos, just data. I didn't need to expose anyone yet. I only needed the truth to be complete when the time came. Each night, before leaving, I noted the hour in a small leather notebook, day 27. All files verified. The ink felt steadier than my pulse. By the 3rd week, the office had begun to thaw toward me again. Reginald's tone softened in meetings, his compliments carefully rationed for others to hear. He'd stopped hovering near my desk, stopped referring to me as our data specialist, and started using my name again, as though restoring it could rewrite what he'd done. On Thursday morning, he called me into his office. The blinds were half closed, slicing the sunlight across his desk in neat bars. "Lydia," he began, leaning back in his chair, "I can see you've refocused. The board noticed your recent reports. Impressive work." I waited. He smiled, the same controlled expression that had once convinced me he was capable of mentorship. "Let's talk about your future here. There may be a management role opening soon, Director of Analytics. Perhaps." The words were polished bait, gleaming with possibility. I recognized the pattern praise, promise, delay, the illusion of progress in exchange for obedience. I nodded once, as if considering it. "That's generous of you," I said quietly. "I'll think about it." He seemed satisfied. Already moving on to his next email, the conversation ended as easily as it began, a transaction of false goodwill. Back at my desk, I felt the calm return, the kind that comes when you've already chosen which bridge to burn, even if no one knows it yet. That evening, long after the others left, I opened the internal archive and began downloading every raw dataset from the last fiscal year field samples. Donor correspondence, expense ledgers, satellite comparisons. All under my own credentials, nothing hidden. I didn't steal a thing. I only preserved what existed before it could be rewritten again. Outside, Portland rain traced slow lines down the window, reflecting the city lights in fragments. I watched the progress bar on my screen climb past 90%, steady and irreversible. When it finished, I copied the backup to an encrypted drive and slipped it into my coat pocket. The office was silent, but I could almost hear the clock inside the server room ticking towards something inevitable. The call came just after midnight, when the apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I almost didn't answer unknown number, no voicemail yet, but something in me, maybe instinct or exhaustion, made me pick up. "Ms. Marin," a man's voice said, calm but alert. "This is Zachary Bennett from the Pacific Environmental Commission." I sat up straight, the fatigue dissolving. I remembered sending that application months ago, a compliance officer role I'd nearly forgotten after hearing nothing back. He continued, "We've reviewed your background with Evergreen. Your grant experience is exactly what we need. If you're still interested, we'd like to offer you the position. For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. The word offer sounded foreign after so many months of dismissal and silence. I am interested, I said finally. Good. The role starts in 3 weeks. You'd oversee compliance audits for statewide conservation grants. We'll handle the transition paperwork. You come highly recommended. The irony stung. But I smiled anyway. 3 weeks works perfectly. After the call ended, I sat on the couch in the dark, the phone still warm in my hand. Outside, the city was quiet, only the occasional hiss of rain on pavement. For the first time in months, the stillness didn't feel like a threat. It felt like room to breathe. I looked around the apartment at the stacks of binders, the evidence of 6 years of work that no one had credited but me. Soon, all of it would belong to my past. I wasn't escaping the system. I was moving above it. When I arrived at work the next morning, Reginald was in his office, laughing over coffee with a donor. Through the glass wall, I saw my charts projected on his screen, my words in his mouth. It no longer angered me. I opened my planner and circled a date 3 weeks from now, my final day. Then I underlined it twice, not as a wish this time, but as a promise. My final week at Evergreen passed in a kind of still rhythm, the way the river looks calm before it crests. I arrived early each morning, the first to switch on the lights, and stayed until the janitor began vacuuming the hallway outside my office. The others whispered that I'd changed. Maybe I had. I spent those days compiling what I called the transition dossier, 200 pages of project records, source data, field metrics, grant correspondence, and audit trails. Every sentence was factual, every chart verified, every claim backed by primary evidence. It was the version of truth the board never saw because it wasn't convenient. Reginald stopped by twice that week, once to compliment a report I'd finalized, another time to remind me about next quarter's donor meeting. He spoke as if my resignation had never existed. I listened, nodded, and made notes I didn't intend to use. By Thursday evening, the dossier was finished. I exported it as a single document, triple-checked the formatting, and attached it to an unsent email draft addressed to the board, HR, and our top 5 donors. The subject line read, Evergreen Conservation Verified Data Summary FY Audit. The body was brief, Dear board members. For your reference, I've attached verified records from all major projects completed under my supervision between 2018 and 2023. Respectfully, Lydia Marin. I added no accusations, no commentary, only evidence. At midnight, I printed my original resignation letter, the one he buried under a stack of proposals, and folded it beside a small flash drive containing identical files. The paper felt lighter this time, as if the weight had transferred somewhere else. I whispered to the empty room, This time, you'll read it. Before shutting down my computer, I scheduled the email to send at exactly 9:00 a.m. the next morning. Outside, Portland rain tapped softly against the glass, steady and unhurried. I gathered my things, turned off the lights, and walked out, leaving the servers humming quietly behind me, counting down the final hours of silence. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, my computer hummed to life and the scheduled message vanished from my outbox. The screen blinked once, then returned to calm blue. For a moment, nothing changed, the same murmur of keyboards, the same scent of burnt coffee from the kitchenette. By 9:10, I heard a chair scrape violently against the conference room floor. By 9:20, the shouting started. The boardroom door was open just enough for sound to spill into the corridor. Reginald's voice, usually smooth, rehearsed, broke into sharp, uneven fragments. Words like audit, discrepancy, and donor compliance drifted through the glass. I didn't move. I continued sorting through the stack of field logs on my desk, hands steady. Through the glass wall, I saw him pacing, color draining from his face. Eleanor Walsh, the board chair, held a printed copy of my dossier, pages fanned across the table like evidence from a trial. Diane from HR stood in the corner, pale and motionless. The hum of the projector filled the gaps between voices. Someone must have asked where I was, because moments later, Diane hurried out, nearly tripping on her heels. "Lydia," she said, breathless. "They want to see you immediately." I closed the binder in front of me. "I'm not an employee anymore." Her eyes widened. "Please, just come in for a moment," Reginald's asking. I stood and placed my badge on the desk. "Then he can ask as a private citizen." For a second, she didn't understand. Then the meaning landed, and she stepped back. Inside the boardroom, Reginald's voice rose again, desperate and cracking. He pointed at a page, shaking his head, while Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. The others were silent, eyes on the numbers. I picked up my coat, slipped the flash drive into the pocket, and walked toward the elevator. The building's glass reflected the skyline gray, wet, unmoved. Behind me, the sound of raised voices followed, muffled but relentless. Truth had entered the room, and it no longer belonged to him. I hadn't planned to step into that boardroom again, but by the time I reached the lobby, Diane was already waiting near the elevator, pale and shaking. "Please," she whispered. "Eleanor insists." Inside, the air was heavy with silence. The long oak table was scattered with printed reports, open laptops, and coffee cups no one had touched. Eleanor Walsh, the board chair, sat at the head, scrolling through the attachments I'd sent. Reginald stood near the projector, his tie loosened, the charm gone from his face. When I entered, his voice rose, brittle and sharp. "She's taken data out of context, deliberately misrepresented our progress." Eleanor didn't look up. "The data says one thing, but the public reports were altered," I said quietly, taking a seat across from her. For the first time, she looked directly at me. "Do you have proof of that?" I slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were the unedited timestamps, server logs, and version histories, each alteration traced back to Reginald's account. The pages rustled softly as she turned them over. Reginald's hands flattened against the table. "This is sabotage," he snapped. "She's always wanted credit." I didn't raise my voice. "These aren't my words, Reginald. They're yours. Every edit, every submission, every false update." Silence stretched until even the hum of the projector felt intrusive. Eleanor's expression hardened. She closed the folder carefully, as if sealing something irreversible. "Ms. Marin," she said finally, "the board will initiate a formal investigation. We'd like to discuss your continued involvement, help us rebuild transparency, perhaps in a senior capacity." I shook my head. "I've already accepted another position, at the Pacific Environmental Commission." I replied, "I start next week." The room shifted. A subtle intake of breath. Eleanor's hands stilled on the folder. Everyone at that table knew what it meant. The commission controlled their funding. Reginald's face went colorless. He stared at me, the realization dawning too late. "I'll ensure full cooperation during your review," I said evenly. "Transparency is always worth rebuilding." Then I stood, leaving the folder where it belonged on their table, not mine. The first morning at the Pacific Environmental Commission, I arrived before sunrise. Same habit, new skyline. My office sat on the 7th floor, overlooking the Willamette River, the same one Evergreen once claimed to be restoring. From this height, the water looked calm, unbothered by human ambition. The desk was smaller than the one I'd left behind, but the view was larger. Stacks of pending audits waited in neat rows, and a note from Zachary Bennett lay on top. "Welcome aboard, Lydia. Let's make things better." I spent the following weeks building the kind of structure I used to wish for, a system that couldn't be twisted to fit anyone's ego. Every funding proposal would now require raw source data attached. All staff concerns had to be acknowledged in writing within 48 hours. I drafted policies for anonymous reporting, mandatory third-party verification, and real-time project dashboards. No one could alter the numbers once they were filed. It wasn't revenge. It was repair. 2 months into the job, my phone rang. Eleanor Walsh's name appeared on the screen. Her tone was polite, measured. "Lydia, I wanted to inform you personally. Reginald Crane has resigned, effective immediately. Evergreen is under full review by our board." I looked out the window at the gray current below. "Transparency protects everyone," I said, "including the organization. I hope this can be a new chapter for all of us," she replied. After the call ended, I sat for a while, listening to the steady hum of the building. No triumph, no bitterness, just the quiet satisfaction of alignment, like a crooked frame finally straightened on the wall. That night, at home, I found the original resignation letter still tucked inside my desk drawer. The ink had faded slightly along the fold. I held it for a moment, remembering the weight of that first humiliation, the silence that followed, the decision that changed everything. Then I tore it once across the middle, dropped it into the recycling bin, and exhaled outside the window. The rain began again, soft and rhythmic like the world resetting itself. 6 months later, a familiar name appeared in the incoming queue, Evergreen Conservation Initiative. Their new funding proposal sat at the top of my review list, neat and orderly. The sender was Patricia Hall, the interim director appointed after Reginald's resignation. I opened the file slowly, unsure what I expected: deflection, embellishment, the same green-tinted graphs, but the numbers were clean this time. The projections were modest, the methods transparent, the credits shared among the full research team. No missing audits, no inflated progress charts. For the first time in years, the document read like it had been written by people who actually cared about the work. The project summary focused on wetland restoration outside Eugene. They'd admitted to delays, explained the causes, and submitted verifiable data. A note in the margin read, "Baseline measurements verified by third-party field teams." I traced the line with my cursor, feeling a quiet pulse of satisfaction. Across the page, one small acknowledgement stood out: special thanks to the Commission's Compliance Division for establishing clearer reporting standards. I finished my review, logged the audit record, and stamped the file approved for consideration. A minute later, my inbox pinged. A single-line message from Patricia. "Thank you for setting a standard we can finally meet." I sat back in my chair, the sound of the river moving faintly through the office glass. Beyond the window, the winter sky stretched over Portland in muted silver, soft and reflective. I thought of every late night spent documenting numbers no one wanted to see, of the silence that once made me feel small, and how it had turned into something stronger than any outburst could have been. Justice, I realized, had never been about the noise. It was about accuracy. Proof. The kind that didn't need to shout to be believed. I closed the file, turned off my monitor, and watched the light fade across the water. The truth had survived, and it was finally enough.